I still remember the sound of the airport doors opening and closing behind me. People were rushing past, talking, laughing, dragging their suitcases across the floor. And I was just sitting there on a cold bench, holding my small brown purse in my lap. My son had told me, "Mom, wait here for a few minutes. We'll be right back." So I waited. I didn't want to worry. I didn't want to doubt him. But those few minutes have stayed with me forever. I told myself they must have gone to get coffee, or maybe to fix something with the tickets. But minutes became half an hour. Half an hour became an hour, and no one came back. I opened my purse to look for my phone, but it wasn't there. My wallet was gone too. Only a folded piece of paper. When I opened it, my heart stopped. It said, "Mom, we can't take care of you anymore. We're sorry." I sat there, staring at those words. The noise of the airport faded around me. I couldn't believe my own son had written that. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I just whispered to myself, "It's okay, Martha. Don't make a scene. Just breathe." A woman sitting nearby looked at me kindly and asked if I was waiting for someone. I smiled and said, "Yes, I am." She nodded and went back to her phone. And I sat there pretending someone was coming for me. Hours passed. Rain started to fall outside the big glass windows. I watched it, thinking about my husband, Thomas. If he were alive, this would never have happened. He used to say, "You'll never be alone, Martha. Not as long as I'm breathing." But he was gone, and maybe I'd been disappearing ever since. A janitor stopped near me and asked if I was okay. I smiled again. "I'm fine, just waiting for someone." He looked at me for a moment, as if he didn't quite believe me. But then he nodded and walked away. The evening crowd got smaller. The airport grew quieter. And I finally understood. They weren't coming back. I took out an old photograph of my son when he was 8 years old. He was smiling, standing by the lake with his father. I touched his face on that photo and whispered, "What did I do wrong?" No answer came. Just the sound of rain and the distant echo of flight announcements. Later, a kind security guard asked if I needed a cab. I nodded. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there anymore. When the airport doors opened again, cold air brushed my face. The rain had stopped. The city lights were shining across the wet streets. And I thought to myself, "Well, Martha, I guess this is your new beginning." I didn't know where I would sleep that night, but I knew one thing for sure: I would survive. I always had. That was the night my real story began. When I think back to the life I had before that day, it almost feels like a movie I once watched a long time ago. The colors were warmer, the laughter was louder, and everything felt alive. I grew up in a small town in Tennessee. Life was simple there. People knew each other by name, and every Sunday the church bell rang across the fields. That's where I met Thomas, my husband. He wasn't the kind of man who talked too much, but when he smiled, it felt like home. We got married young, built a tiny house with white shutters, and planted roses by the porch. He worked at a lumber yard, and I took care of our home. Money was never plenty, but we had love, and that made every meal taste rich. When our son, David, was born, I thought I'd never seen anything more perfect. He had his father's eyes and the same stubborn way of furrowing his brows. Thomas would lift him high in the air, and his laughter would fill the whole house. Back then, I believed love could keep anything together. I still remember one summer evening. Thomas was fixing a fence behind the house, and I stood on the porch holding David. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky orange. Thomas looked up and said, "Someday, this boy's gonna make us proud." And I smiled, because I believed him. Years passed. David grew tall, curious, and full of dreams. He wanted to go to college, and even though money was tight, we saved every bit we could. I took small sewing jobs from neighbors. Thomas worked extra shifts. We never told David how hard it was. We just wanted him to have a better life. When he got accepted into the university in Nashville, I cried tears of joy. I still remember the day we dropped him off. He hugged us both and said, "I'll make you proud, Mom. I promise." And I believed him with all my heart. The house felt empty after that. I'd wake up and still make breakfast for 3. I'd fold laundry that wasn't there. But Thomas always said, "It's a good kind of lonely, Martha. Means the boy's growing up." We'd sit on the porch at night, hand in hand, talking about what David might be doing that day. and I'd pray that he was eating well, sleeping enough, staying warm. Then one winter morning, everything changed. Thomas didn't wake up. He went to sleep with a smile, holding my hand, and never opened his eyes again. The world went quiet after that. The house felt colder. Even the roses outside seemed to stop blooming. David came home for the funeral. He hugged me tight, but I could tell he was already living in another world, busy, grown up, far away. After the funeral, he stayed for a week. Then he said, "Mom, you should come live near me. Nashville has everything you'll need. You shouldn't be alone out here." I wanted to say no. I wanted to stay where Thomas and I had lived our whole lives. But I looked at my son, the only piece of family I had left, and I said, "All right, sweetheart, I'll come." I sold the house, packed my memories in a few boxes, and moved into a small room in his home. At first, it felt like a new beginning. He had a wife, Sarah, who worked at a law office. She seemed kind, polite, quiet, always busy. The first night, she made dinner for us all, and we sat around the table laughing about little things. I thought, maybe this could work. Maybe life was giving me another chance at family. But slowly, I started to notice the little silences. Sarah stopped sitting with me after dinner. David came home later and later, always tired, always distracted. The house felt smaller, like I was taking up space I wasn't meant to. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I didn't mean to, but their voices carried. Sarah said, "Your mom's a sweet lady, but this isn't working. She needs more care than we can give." And David said softly, "I know. I just don't know what to do." I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. I just stared at the picture of Thomas on my nightstand and whispered, "They're tired of me, aren't they?" He didn't answer, of course. But in my heart, I already knew. Still, I tried. I smiled every morning, cooked breakfast, folded their laundry, watered their plants. I told myself, just be useful, Martha. Be kind, be quiet. Because sometimes, silence is the only way to stay loved. But no matter how much I tried, I could feel myself fading from their world, like a photograph left too long in the sun. And that's how the months slipped by, until the day my son said he was taking me to visit my sister. The day everything changed. After a few months of living with David and Sarah, I began to notice the little things that change before people say what they really feel. The quiet sighs, the closed doors, the way conversation stopped when I walked into the room. It wasn't loud or cruel. It was soft, polite, almost invisible. And somehow, that made it hurt even more. Sarah stopped asking me to sit with her in the living room. David stopped bringing home my favorite cookies from the store. They were small things, but they spoke louder than words ever could. I started spending more time in my room. I'd sit by the window and knit or listen to the radio. Sometimes I'd hear them laughing downstairs, and I'd smile, even when it stung a little. I told myself, "They're young, Martha. They need their own space. Don't be in the way." But one evening, I heard them whispering again, their voices low, but not low enough. Sarah said, "Your mom left her cup on the counter again." David sighed, "I'll clean it. Just don't say anything." "I'm not trying to be mean," Sarah replied, "but I can't keep doing this. It's like having another child in the house." Her words cut deep, even though I wasn't meant to hear them. Another child. After everything I had done. After all the nights I stayed awake when he was sick. After all the years of sacrifice. I was now another child. I sat there in my room, my knitting needles still in my hands, and I whispered, "Maybe I've stayed too long." The next morning, I made breakfast: early eggs, toast, coffee. When they came downstairs, I greeted them with a smile. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said. Sarah gave me a polite smile back, but she didn't sit down. "I'm not really hungry," she said softly. Then she looked at David, and I saw something pass between them, a look that said what words didn't have to. He cleared his throat. "Mom, we were thinking, maybe you could take a short trip. You haven't seen Aunt June in years." I looked up from my cup. A trip. It sounded nice, almost, but there was something behind his voice that made my stomach tighten. "Maybe I could," I said quietly. "I'd love to see her again." He smiled, relieved. "Great. We'll take you to the airport next weekend." All that week, I tried to believe it was just a visit. I folded my clothes neatly, I packed the little blue sweater Aunt June had given me years ago, and I left the rest of my things behind because I believed I was coming back. On the night before the trip, I couldn't sleep. The house was silent. I walked through the hallway, looking at the pictures on the wall, family photos, smiles frozen in time, David's wedding picture, his graduation, our old house. So many moments I thought would last forever. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water. Sarah walked in, wearing her robe, surprised to see me awake. "Oh, Mrs. Parker," she said softly, "you're still up?" I smiled, just couldn't sleep. "Big day tomorrow." She nodded but didn't look me in the eye. Then she said something that stayed with me for days. "Travel light, okay? You won't need much." Her voice was calm, but there was something final in it. Something that made my heart ache. I went back to my room and sat on the bed, holding the small framed picture of Thomas. I whispered to it, "They're sending me away, aren't they?" Of course, he didn't answer. But the silence said enough. The next morning was quiet. I wore my favorite floral dress, brushed my hair, and put on a touch of lipstick the same shade Thomas used to say made me look alive. When I came downstairs, David smiled weakly. "You look beautiful, Mom," he said. Sarah just nodded and picked up my suitcase. The car ride to the airport was mostly silent. I tried to talk, to fill the air with small stories about Aunt June, about the roses in her garden, but they only nodded politely. David kept his eyes on the road. Sarah kept scrolling through her phone. At one point, I looked out the window and whispered, "You remember when your father taught you how to drive on this road?" David smiled faintly. "Yeah, I remember." Then silence again. When we reached the airport, David parked near the entrance. He carried my bag and said, "Wait right here, Mom. I'll get your ticket." I nodded, trusting him, because he was my son. He kissed my forehead and said, "We'll be right back." And that was the last time I saw him. I sat there, watching the doors open and close, people hugging, saying goodbye, walking into new lives. And I realized, I wasn't being sent to visit family. I was being left behind. Still, even then, I couldn't hate him. Because love doesn't disappear just because someone stops giving it back. Love just sits quietly in your heart, hoping one day it might be enough again. The airport smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies, and the sound of rolling suitcases echoed through the halls. I sat on the bench, my small brown purse clutched tightly in my lap, pretending to wait for a ticket that would never come. David and Sarah had promised me a short trip to visit my sister and June. I had packed a small bag, put on my best dress, and believed them completely. I trusted them because he was my son, my only child. I trusted him because I had raised him with every ounce of love in my heart. Minutes passed, then an hour, and still, no one returned. At first, I thought maybe they had gone to the wrong terminal. Maybe the ticket counter was crowded. Maybe it was just a small delay. But the longer I waited, the heavier the truth felt pressing against my chest. I looked around. People hugged goodbye, families laughed, kids ran to their parents. And there I was, invisible, left behind. A young man sat down next to me. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Yes, I'm just waiting." And I meant it in the quietest way possible. Waiting for something I knew deep down would never come. I opened my purse again and found a folded note I hadn't noticed before. My hands shook as I unfolded it. It was from David, written in his small, familiar handwriting. "Mom, we can't take care of you anymore. We're sorry." The words were calm, almost polite, but my heart felt like it had been ripped in two. I sat on the bench and stared at the paper, trying to remember a time when love didn't hurt this way. I thought of Thomas, my husband, of the years we had built together, the life we had shared, the laughter that once filled every corner of our home. And now, nothing. Tears wanted to fall, but I didn't let them. I sat quietly, letting the words sink in, because screaming wouldn't change anything. Crying wouldn't bring him back. I watched the crowd around me. Some people looked impatient, some rushed to gates, some called their loved ones. I envied them. I envied the fact that they still had someone to come back to. Hours passed. The airport lights grew warmer as evening settled in. A janitor passed by with his mop and bucket. He stopped and looked at me kindly. "Are you alone, ma'am?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "Just waiting." He didn't ask more. He just nodded and moved on. And somehow, That small acknowledgement felt comforting. As the night grew darker, I finally stood up. The terminal was nearly empty. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know how I would get home. I didn't even have money for a taxi. I walked slowly to the exit doors, breathing in the cool Tennessee air. Rain had started to drizzle again, leaving the pavement shiny under the city lights. The world felt big and cold, and I felt very small in it. I whispered to myself, "Well, Martha, this is your new beginning." It wasn't a happy thought. It wasn't comforting. It was simply a truth I had to accept. I walked out of the airport alone, and for the first time in my life, I realized that sometimes the people you love the most are not the ones who stay. Sometimes they leave, but even then, I didn't hate them, because love doesn't vanish just because someone abandons you. Love stays quietly, waiting for you to find it again somewhere somehow. And in that cold, lonely night, I promised myself I would survive. I would find a way, because even when the world turns its back, life keeps moving forward. And maybe, just maybe, I could find a new family, a new place to belong. The rain was light, but enough to make the pavement glisten. I stood outside the airport doors, my small brown purse clutched tightly to my chest. I had no money, no phone, no plan, just the echo of David and Sarah's footsteps fading behind me. The city lights reflected in puddles, and I realized how quiet the world could be when no one was waiting for you. I felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. Fear, because I didn't know where to go. Relief, because the decision to survive rested entirely on me. I walked slowly toward a nearby bench, hoping someone might notice me. I didn't want to beg. I didn't want to show weakness. But inside, my heart was pounding like a drum. After a few minutes, a man approached. He was in his 50s, wearing a janitor's uniform. His name tag said Mark. He didn't look at me with pity. He just asked gently, "Are you okay, ma'am?" I shook my head slightly. "No, I'm not. I don't have any money. I don't have a phone. I don't know where to go." And for the first time since being left, I let my voice shake. Mark didn't flinch. He knelt slightly to meet my eyes. "It's okay," he said. "You're not alone right now. Let's figure this out." He gave me a small cup of coffee from the airport cafe. The warmth seeped into my hands, and for a moment, I felt human again. I told him my story, every small detail about Thomas, about David and Sarah, about the life I had lost and the betrayal I had endured. He listened quietly, nodding, never interrupting, never judging. When I finished, he said, "You know, ma'am, sometimes life throws us into the middle of the storm, but storms pass. You just have to hold on until they do." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that someone could still be kind when everything else had turned cold. He called a local service for me, a senior support group that helped people in trouble. Within an hour, a kind woman named Ellen arrived. She smiled at me gently and said, "Hi Martha, we're going to take care of you tonight. You're safe now." I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and said softly, "Thank you." That night, I slept in a small room provided by the group. The bed was clean, the sheets smelled faintly of lavender, and the window looked out onto a quiet garden. I realized, for the first time in hours, I felt some sense of peace. Over the next few days, I met more people, volunteers, staff, and other seniors who had stories just like mine, stories of loss, heartbreak, and survival. They didn't know my son had left me. They didn't judge me for it. They just welcomed me, as if I had always belonged there. I spent my mornings in the garden, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. I helped in the kitchen, chopped vegetables, stirred soups, and set the tables. And slowly, I began to realize something I hadn't felt in a long time. I belonged somewhere again. David and Sarah had left me at an airport, yes. They had abandoned me when I needed them most. But in their absence, I found kindness from strangers. I found people who cared, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And in that, I began to rebuild myself, piece by piece, smile by smile, cup of coffee by cup of coffee. Even when life pushes you to the edge, even when the people you love fail you, sometimes the world offers unexpected hands to hold. That was the beginning of a new chapter, one that didn't rely on anyone but me, and yet, somehow, felt full of love all the same. The first morning at the senior home, I woke to birds chirping outside the window. Sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, warm and gentle. For the first time in days, I didn't wake up with a pit in my stomach. I felt safe. The woman who had welcomed me, Ellen, brought breakfast. "Good morning, Martha," she said with a smile. "Everyone's looking forward to meeting you." I smiled back, unsure of what to say. I had spent so long expecting disappointment, betrayal, or indifference. And now, there was kindness. During breakfast, I met the other residents. There was Mrs. Thompson, who loved knitting, Harold, who played chess better than anyone I had ever seen, and even young volunteers who came in to help with chores and companionship. They didn't know my story, but their warmth made it feel like home. I discovered something surprising. Even though I had been abandoned by my own family, here, I felt seen, not for what I had lost, but for who I was. Over the next few days, routines formed. I helped in the kitchen, prepared small meals, and swept the floors. I took walks in the garden, and sometimes, we would just sit together in silence, watching the clouds drift past. And slowly, I began to laugh again, quiet at first, then louder, warmer. One evening, as I was folding laundry, Mrs. Thompson came over. "You know, Martha," she said, "we may not be blood, but we're a family, and family sticks together." I paused, holding a soft blanket in my hands. Those words were simple, yet they carried a weight hadn't realized I needed. For years, I had tied my heart to David, thinking he was my only family. And now, I saw that family could be found in unexpected places. Sometimes, we shared stories from our pasts. I told them about Thomas, my husband, and how he had taught me to find joy in small things. I told them about David as a little boy, about his first day of school, his laughter, his stubbornness. They listened quietly, nodding and smiling, as if my memories were treasures to hold. Evenings were the hardest though. I would sit by the window in my room, the city lights glowing outside, and think of David and Sarah. I wondered if they ever thought of me, if they regretted leaving me. But then I would hear someone laughing in the hallway or smell fresh cookies baking in the kitchen, and I reminded myself, I was alive, I was safe, I was cared for. Little by little, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hope that life could still be good. Hope that love didn't have to come only from blood. Hope that I could heal. One day, Ellen brought me a small garden plot to tend. "Plant whatever you like," she said. I planted marigolds, my favorite flowers, remembering the ones Thomas and I had planted years ago. Every morning, I watered them carefully, watching them grow, watching life continue. I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. For the first time since the airport, I realized something important. Family isn't always about who you're born to. Sometimes it's about who chooses to stay, who listens, who cares, who makes you feel like you belong. And in this quiet, unexpected place, I had found my new family. Even with my new family around me, some nights were still quiet. The kind of quiet that lets memories sneak in when you're not ready. I would sit by the window, watching the city lights flicker, and suddenly I would be back in my old home. Thomas's laugh echoing through the kitchen, David's small footsteps running down the hall. I remembered the mornings we spent together, breakfast on the table, sunlight streaming through the windows. I remembered Thomas teaching David how to ride a bike, holding him steady until he found his balance. I remembered the smell of fresh bread, the sound of the garden in bloom, and the warmth of a family that once felt unbreakable. And then I would remember the airport, the way my son left me sitting on that cold bench, my small purse clutched tightly, the folded note in my hands, the words, calm and precise, telling me I was no longer part of their lives. Some nights, the memories weighed so heavily that I could barely breathe. I wondered if I had failed as a mother, if I had done something wrong that made my son turn away. I questioned every choice, every word, every moment that had led me to that airport bench. But slowly, over time, I began to see things differently. I realized that David's choices were his own. They had nothing to do with my worth or my love. Sometimes, people fail to give the love you need, even those you expect it from the most. And that is not your failure. I began writing letters. Not to send, at first just to pour out my heart. Letters to Thomas. Letters to David. Letters to the younger Martha who had believed in perfect families and endless love. I wrote about my grief, my anger, my confusion, and my hope. And with each word, the memories became less sharp, less like a knife, and more like pages of a story I could hold gently in my hands. One afternoon, I shared my story with Ellen and a few of the other residents. I keep thinking about them, I said softly, and I can't stop remembering everything, the good, the bad, everything. Ellen smiled. Memories don't fade because you want them to. They fade because you learn to carry them differently. And she was right. I didn't have to forget. I didn't have to erase David from my heart. I only had to learn to carry the love I still felt, alongside the pain, without letting it crush me. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about me. It was about freeing myself from the weight of anger and betrayal. It was about letting my heart open again, not for what was lost, but for what I could still have. In the evenings, I would sit in the garden, tending to the marigolds, and I felt Thomas's presence in the sun on my face, in the flowers I planted, in the love that still lingered around me. I realized that love doesn't disappear just because people leave. It grows, even in new soil, in unexpected places. And slowly, I began to let go of the guilt, the hurt, and the endless questions. I began to smile more freely. I laughed at small things again. I even started sharing stories about David, about his childhood with the new family I had found. And every time I did, the memories that once haunted me began to feel like blessings instead. Life had taken so much from me, but it had also given me something unexpected, a chance to heal, to love again, and to find a family that chose to stay. It had been months since that day at the airport. Months since I felt the sharp ache of being left behind. Life at the senior home was calm, full of small joys and quiet smiles. But there was one thing I needed to do before I could truly move forward. I needed to write to my son. I sat at the small wooden desk in my room, a blank piece of paper before me, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel everything. The anger, the sadness, the loneliness, and the love that never left me. I picked up my pen and started slowly. Dear David, I don't know if you will ever read this, or if you even want to, but I need to tell you what has been in my heart. I want you to know that I love you. I always have, and I always will. My hand trembled, but I continued. I wrote about Thomas, about our life together, about the joys of raising him, about the sacrifices we made to give him a better life. I wrote about the airport, about the pain of being left behind, but I wrote it gently. Not to blame him, only to let him understand how much it had hurt. I know life is complicated, I wrote. I know we all make mistakes. I am not angry anymore. I forgive you, and I hope, one day, you can forgive yourself. As I wrote, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The words on the page became a bridge between the past and the life I wanted to live now. It wasn't about reconciling with him. It wasn't about expecting him to return. It was about freeing myself from the bitterness that had lingered for too long. I folded the letter carefully and put it in an envelope. I didn't send it right away. I wanted to make sure it was ready, that my heart truly meant every word. Days later, I read it aloud to Ellen and a few friends at the home. They listened silently, nodding, some with tears in their eyes. When I finished, Ellen said, "Sometimes the hardest letters we write are the ones we write to our own hearts, not just to the people we love." And she was right. Writing that letter didn't change the past. It didn't bring David back. It didn't erase the hurt, but it allowed me to stand taller, breathe easier, and move forward with peace in my heart. That night, I placed the letter in my drawer, and for the first time in months, I slept without the weight of anger pressing on my chest. I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't just for the person who hurt you. It's for you. It's the key to healing, to living fully, to letting love flow again. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by my new family, I felt a sense of calm, hadn't known since Thomas passed. I had survived abandonment. I had survived heartbreak. And now, I could finally begin to thrive. Life slowly began to take on a new rhythm. The mornings were filled with sunlight, laughter, and the scent of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen. I would wake early, help in the garden, and watch the marigolds I had planted bloom under the warm Tennessee sun. It was a simple life, but it was mine. I started to connect with the people around me in ways I hadn't expected. Harold taught me to play chess, and I discovered a joy in strategy I never knew I had. Mrs. Thompson showed me new knitting patterns, and I spent hours working on blankets for the residents. Even the volunteers became like family, young people full of energy and kindness, who reminded me that the world wasn't all cold and indifferent. I began to look forward to each day. I laughed more freely, shared stories, and even helped organize small gatherings for the residents. I realized that while my old life had been taken from me, this new one offered something equally valuable: choice. I could choose to love, to give, and to belong without fear of betrayal. Sometimes I still thought of David. I thought of the life we could have had. I thought of how easy it would have been to be cruel or resentful, but I had learned something important. Holding on to anger only keeps you tied to the past. Forgiveness, even if unspoken, sets you free. One afternoon, Ellen came to me with a suggestion. "Why don't you start a little garden club?" she said. "Share your love of flowers with the others." I agreed. We planted roses, daisies, and sunflowers. Residents and volunteers came together, and soon, the garden became a place of laughter, stories, and shared memories. It wasn't just a garden, it was a symbol of growth, resilience, and hope. In the evenings, I would sit by the window, sipping tea, and think of Thomas and the life we had shared. I realized that love never really leaves you. It changes, it adapts, and sometimes it finds new soil to bloom again. I found myself smiling more, speaking with confidence, and helping others who were struggling. I began to understand that life's hardships are not the end. They are opportunities to grow, to rebuild, and to find joy in unexpected places, even on quiet nights. When memories of the past would come uninvited, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the people who stayed, for the kindness of strangers, and for the chance to start anew. I had survived abandonment. I had survived heartbreak. And now, I had learned to live fully again. Life had given me a second chance, not the life I thought I wanted, but a life full of meaning, love, and peace. And I embraced it with all my heart. Years have passed since that cold, rainy day at the airport, and though the memory still lingers, it no longer holds power over me. I have learned something very important. Life may take from you, but it also gives sometimes in ways you never expect. I think of David often. I think of what I lost and the heartache I carried. But I also think of the forgiveness I found within myself. I wrote him a letter once, full of love and understanding, and in doing so, I released the weight of anger I had carried for too long. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. It doesn't always mean that people return to your life. Sometimes, it simply means that your heart can rest again. And that is what I have done. I wake up each morning to the sound of birds, sunlight streaming into my room, and the laughter of people who care for me. I tend the garden, share stories with my friends, and sometimes I just sit quietly, letting the warmth of the day fill me. I have found a new family, not one born of blood, but one born of choice. People who see me, who value me, who care without asking anything in return. And through them, I have learned that belonging is not about who stays. It's about where you are seen, heard, and loved. Even the pain I once carried has transformed. It has become a guide, reminding me of my strength, reminding me that I can survive even the harshest storms, reminding me that life, even when it takes away, can give back in ways that are unexpected and beautiful. And so, I live now with a quiet heart, grateful for the life I have, for the people who chose to stay, and for the love that has never truly left me. Not from my son, not from my husband, not from the world, but from within myself. If you are listening to this, remember something, dear one. Life may disappoint you, people may leave, but your heart has the power to heal, to forgive, and to find love again. It may take time, it may take patience, but it is always possible. And for me, after everything, after all the sorrow and the nights spent alone, I have found peace. Peace in my heart, and hope in the life I am still living. Because no matter what happens, life goes on, and so do we.